Hey Panda Nation, you are listening to the Inverted Gear podcast with your hosts Nelson and Hillary. Join us every week as we take you behind the scenes into our brand, discuss upcoming projects, and conversate beyond the mat with the interesting people we've met along the way.
Hey Will, how are you?
I'm great. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Can you give a quick intro for those in the audience that don't know you?
Sure, yeah. So Will Safford, I am a brown belt under Andre Galvao and trained at Atos for about 10 years out in San Diego. I'm in New York now. But yeah, I've kind of worn many hats in the jiu-jitsu industry. I was the editor of Jiu-Jitsu magazine for a couple of years. Then I switched over to Flow Grappling. I worked as the content marketer for Flow Grappling for a few years. Now I work for a few different companies, Hyperfly being one of them, BJJ Fanatics, which also has a fitness site called Effective Strength and Conditioning. So I also do some work for them. And throughout that entire time, I was also kind of on the side, a personal trainer, strength coach, really focusing on combat athletes, jiu-jitsu fighters, and grapplers.
That's super cool. You cover the whole gamut of things you can do in the jiu-jitsu industry there.
Yeah. It was just kind of an interesting turn of events, how it all worked out. I started as a fitness coach in 2012. I left a job in finance, and I ended up doing this fitness test where you had to jump, and it was the vertical leap test, right? So I ended up coming down and breaking my leg on the landing. And so I was sitting there on the couch for weeks, and I was like, man, this sucks. I'm not making any money here on the couch. You know, when you're a trainer, you have to be out in the field working. So that's when I had the idea to start my own clothing line for jiu-jitsu. And it was basically focused on strength and conditioning clothing, like dry fit type shirts and fitness shorts and stuff for jiu-jitsu athletes. And while I was doing that, once that got up and running, I said, okay, great. I have a brand now, but how do I tell people about this? I had no idea how to market. And this was back in 2012, 2013, and blogs were really big. So I started writing for my own blog, and I said, let me see how much it costs to put an ad in Jiu-Jitsu magazine. And it ended up being way more than I could afford at the time. So I asked the owner at the time, Mike Velez, I said, Mike, can I write some articles for you and trade for ad space? And he said, yeah, let's do it. So that's how I kind of got my foot in the door with Jiu-Jitsu magazine. And then that kind of rolled into Flow Grappling and then BJJ Fanatics. So it was all because I broke my leg in the beginning.
Very cool. I mean, the evolution of the jiu-jitsu media has been fascinating. And I mean, I remember when the only access to techniques we had was either really old VHS tapes that have been copied over and over a bunch of times, or the old picture sequences that were on magazines or Victory Belt books, the Mastering the Rubber Guard and Guerrilla Jiu-Jitsu. I think everybody that started around the time I did, everybody owns those books still. They're somewhere in the library. And I still go back and look at those books, and now you go to your website or BJ Fanatics or any of there's so much access to stuff now. It's BJ Fanatics, it's Jiu-Jitsu, what is Keenan stuff, Jiu-Jitsu X.
Yep, Flow Grappling.
Flow Grappling or even YouTube. There's so much stuff on YouTube now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's awesome, right? Because everything is kind of out there and you have so much knowledge at your disposal. But I remember so my first days at Atos, I had never seen the first day I went to Atos, I was a blue belt. I had just got my blue belt, and we learned the Berimbolo. And I was like, what is this? No one knew about the Berimbolo back then, right? It had never been seen. So it was I started with Gracie Baja as a white belt, and I really kind of valued that experience because it was so structured and so fundamental that I still use some of that fundamental white belt technique that I learned. Now I almost like feel for the white belts because you're exposed to berimbolos and worm guards and heel hooks and the leg lock game right from day one, and it's almost like overwhelming in a way.
Yeah,
So
like we had the advantage of being able to wade in the kiddie pool a little bit,
right,
and like the amount of techniques that were used, and now there's just so much more like right away, especially. And then also it depends how the academy has a setup, or how big of the fundamentals program or like a ramp on they're doing, an on ramp they're
yes,
doing, because like you said, there's just so much. And then the more jiu-jitsu evolves, especially all like upside down crab ride and like it's not just berimbolo anymore. Now there's the baby hook, and then there's
yeah,
the upside down crab ride, and then they're going to that side and then coming back to that side, and they're putting then lacing the leg through to do the bolo, and then there's a rebolo, and it's just insane. And like you said, like back when the bolo started, it was kind of like, okay, this is how you bolo. But then AD just has that has branched out so much. Same with all the lapel guards or the modern leg lock game.
yeah.
It's just not one thing to learn. It's like, oh, I have to learn this one thing. Now there's just so many layers to it now.
There's so many layers to it, which makes it awesome, right? Like jiu-jitsu is expanding. We're not even close. Like I think last night on Who's Number One, Mikey Musumeci introduced a new technique, right? Like that was his thing. He wanted to show the world this new technique that he's been working on. So, which is great, right? Like there's so much more to go.
Of course, I already seen people arguing. It's like it's not new. That was around 5 years ago.
Well, that's what's funny, man, because like the same thing in fitness applies. Like all the things that are trending in fitness right now and all the like techniques, even in jiu-jitsu, they've been around. People have done them. They just kind of like rebranded, or they fall away and then they come back. So
it's either that or people are like, yeah, the Russians were doing that in the 60s.
yeah. Japanese Shuto was doing this in the 90s, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the other thing too, like now you mentioned, is especially in Abu Dhabi year, suddenly everybody wants to wrestle. Suddenly everybody wants to have like a very tight passing game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny, it was like it kind of like comes full circle, because that's where jiu-jitsu was going maybe 10 years ago. And then we went down another rabbit hole, and now we're back to it. And now you guys, the Wrestling Fanatics website, I had an ad the other day. It was like John Smith, like low singles. Yeah, I'm old enough that I remember like my wrestling coach making us watch VHS tapes of like John Smith.
Oh, really?
On his short shorts, like showing the low single sequences and saying that's a good hold.
I remember that one.
That's a good hold. After every move, that's a good hold.
Yep.
So it's amazing.
But isn't that funny though, that like wrestling for a lot of the schools that I went to, and I'm more of a guard player. I prefer to play guard. Wrestling was like an afterthought. Like you didn't really put a lot of emphasis on takedowns, and but now that's just like one more thing that you have to add to your game, that if you want to be competitive, right, you have to, especially in no-gi, which is just growing like crazy, you have to add the wrestling. That's just another component that you have to add to your game. Yeah.
And then somebody gave me this advice a long time ago, and I always thought it was funny. It was, don't learn wrestling from jiu-jitsu guys.
Oh, yeah.
Don't learn takedowns. Wasn't even wrestling, just takedowns. Because I remember, like, especially like the fundamentals program, a lot of it was like very watered down, either judo throws. And I remember at one point everybody was just getting like 2 grips on the lapel and going like 1, 2, and drop seonagi. And that worked really well. And guys, I had no idea what was going on, but try doing that to like a decent judo guy.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to end up well for you, And then same with like some of the single finishes people will show. It's like that. This only works if the guy on top has no idea how to work a wizard, has no idea how to sprawl, has no idea how to hand fight. So I think we are closing that gap though. Like some of these competitive high level no-gi guys, like their wrestling is getting really, really good. And they're like blending, like, they're setting up the takedowns with the submission. They're setting up the submissions with the takedown, and like you said, like the game just keeps evolving.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think we're in an awesome time in jiu-jitsu. It's like it's almost like catch 22, right? Like there's so much information out there. Like I've just scratched the surface. Like I'm a brown belt now and I'm just scratching the surface on the leg lock game, which is like, man, you think you've advanced so far. I've put in 11 years and now it's like you're a white belt all over again. Right. So it's a catch 22 because it's expanding jujitsu. It's creating new opportunities. Right. Jujitsu fighters are making more money now than they've ever made. The press is bigger than it's ever been. There's more opportunities for everybody. I mean, we have millionaires in jujitsu, athletes who are millionaires. Like, I don't think that was ever a thing even 5 years ago, 5-10 years ago. So and you don't have this urgency or this need to go over to MMA. So it's catch 22 because there's so much information, there's almost too much information, and but also there's just tremendous opportunity right now.
Yeah. The other thing too, I think we talked about like how wrestling and that's getting more incorporated now. An actual strength conditioning program is getting incorporated more because for a long time the going advice was like, you want to get better at jiu-jitsu, you do more jiu-jitsu. But at the same time, that's what leads to injuries if you're not taking care of your body and the only thing you're doing is like the same repetitive motions that are found in jiu-jitsu. You're not really doing like anything to strengthen your joints and muscles. So you want to talk about that real quick? What do you see? Where do you see the strength conditioning jiu-jitsu going? I know the guys in Atos being kind of the forefront of this. And like, Alex, shout out to powerful Alex Sterner, who's been working with these guys for a long time.
Alex is awesome. Yep.
But then, yeah, you see all these guys actually like, following the program and like, squatting and deadlifting and B-stand squats and all this stuff Alex has them doing. And like, you see the benefits, like, you see the Atos guys at tournaments and they're like, they look like athletes.
Absolutely. I mean, well, that's where jiu-jitsu is finally heading. And I think maybe it was a martial art and now it's a massive sport, right? So hello. Hillary just walked in. So yeah, people are training like professionals now, and it's like there's money on the line, there's opportunities on the line. So you kind of have to train like a pro. And I think, the one thing about jiu-jitsu is that you can get a lot of your qualities on the mat. I think Marcelo Garcia was always, big on just training more jiu-jitsu, right? Just to get better at jiu-jitsu, you have to just train a lot of jiu-jitsu. So, and I definitely believe in that, but there's a few things that you can't get on the mat. And one of them is absolute strength, right? You get really good cardio. You can even get flexibility. You get some mobility when you're put in crazy positions on the mat. You get strength endurance. You get isometric strength, but pure strength is really hard to develop while you're actually training on the mat. So I think that is a big opportunity that people are now getting into. And Alex, the guys at Election Performance over there in Atos, he's really focused on making people as strong as possible without taking away from their training, their jiu-jitsu performance, or getting them injured in the process. So yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity. And the performance side of things too. So you mentioned injury prevention, right? So when you're a pro jiu-jitsu athlete, you are putting your body through the ringer every single day, right? So injuries are bound to happen. One of the best things you can do is strength train. Strength training is one of the best ways to strengthen not only your muscles, but your tendons and your joints. So adding that component is going to help you, last longer on the mat as far from an injury standpoint, but also the performance side, right? So you're going to be stronger. You're going to be able to endure a little bit longer. You're going to be able to, your spine is going to be able to withstand, repetitive kind of abuse a little bit longer when you're strength training. But from the hobbyist standpoint, and now, I've kind of always been a hobbyist. I've competed a few times, but strength is not really my main focus. My main focus is longevity, durability, right? So I get a lot of my personal satisfaction from training jiu-jitsu. It brings a lot of joy to my life, right? So when I can't train, I'm bummed out, right? Like your life isn't as good when you can't train. So for me, the stuff that I do off the mat is really more focused on being able to be on the mat, right? Prevent injuries. So I do a little bit of strength training, but I do a lot of mobility stuff. I do a lot of just like joint integrity type stuff, and a lot of core training, because I have a herniated disc in my lower back. If you've been training jiu-jitsu long enough, you're probably going to have one of those eventually. So it's super important for me to keep my core strong, and so that I can just stay on the mats.
Yeah, I agree with you. And the other thing too is like you mentioned is setting up your strength conditioning in a way that you're able to do jujitsu. Because I remember plenty of times I had like training partners that were like really into powerlifting,
Mm-hmm.
and just coming in and would not being able to do the drills or whatever technique we are working on because they were just burnt out from like max effort squats or high rep deadlifts. And I'm like, what? It's like at one point you have to decide, is like, are you powerlifting as jiu-jitsu or a jiu-jitsu athlete that like strength trains?
Yeah,
Because you can't just do both, and like your body can only recover from so much volume.
absolutely.
And that's one of the things we've been doing, is just doing more of kettlebell stuff, kettlebell clubs, maces, which are getting super popular.
Mm-hmm.
So your boy Mark Wildman, I found his
Mm-hmm.
YouTube channel during the pandemic, and I was like, oh my god, this is awesome. So, and then this was during the great kettlebell shortage of the pandemic. So I couldn't find kettlebells anywhere. So I was like, well, let's just get some made. So I was able to find a factory in China, and like we got kettlebells made for inverted gear, we got
Oh,
clubs made, we got maces made. And he's been
awesome.
following like Mark's programming he's putting together from all his videos, and now you guys have the club program on effective strength conditioning. I've been following that for like 2-3 weeks now, and I'm really liking it.
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of single club stuff before, and I never realized how much lack of rotation I had on my elbows until I started like swinging clubs around, and then suddenly like I should have tapped to a few of those arm bars over the years.
Oh yeah.
I like,
Absolutely.
my elbows and shoulders are so much happier now that I've been doing like, shield casts and inside circles and outside circles, and working my way up to doing mills, and then like working my way up to doing some of the mace stuff. And nothing is more humbling than holding like a 10-pound mace that you think is going to be light. And then, trying to swing that bad boy, and suddenly you're like, oh,
100%, man. 100%.
that,
It's
that,
oh,
that lever just changes things.
absolutely. It's like you have this like moment where you're like, holy cow, man, I have been walking around with this tension in my shoulders for how long, right? Like, especially, and you mentioned the elbows too. Both of my elbows when I started training in clubs were just lit up. They were like, wow, what are you doing right now? And I credit that to just a lot of time on the mat from gripping, right? In jiu-jitsu, we're constantly in like this hunched over position, right? So if you can imagine like your shoulders are closed and you're kind of concave position with your chest, that is like so bad for everything. It's so bad for your breathing, it's so bad for your posture, it's bad for blood flow to your head. And when you start doing some of the club or the mace stuff, you really have to open up your thoracic spine. You have to open up your shoulders, and it's kind of like it's doing the reverse of what you've been doing for so long while you're on the mat. So I just turned 36, and both of my shoulders when I hit 36 were like, oh man, both of my shoulders were done. Right after I'd get off the mat, both of my shoulders were in pain, both of my elbows were in pain, and I was like, man, I gotta switch something up. I gotta find something new. So so then I found, Mark Wildman, and his whole YouTube channel is all about using these like unconventional tools like maces and clubs and kettlebells. And I started doing the the club program, and my shoulders are like, it's like night and day. My shoulders are just so much healthier. I feel so much better, and that made me so much more happy, because like it was like hope, like, oh, I can go back to jiu-jitsu. I can continue to train again. So if I personally think everybody should be using them, regardless if you're old and beat up, or you're a new trainer, a new grappler who wants to just have healthy shoulders and full functioning thoracic spine. get into clubs and maces and kettlebells too.
I agree. What do you think, Hillary? You have your shoulders benefited from the Wildman Club
Yeah,
program?
like I remember when I lived in San Diego, I'd alternate days between 24-hour fitness and jujitsu, and it could never do both.
Yeah.
And I was trying to I was doing a lot more just like bodybuilding type of lifting programs, like the lifting like the 1 rep or 1 to 3 rep maximums, and like that's it, and
Mm-hmm.
never really paying attention to the rotation. I thought I just had to stretch more,
Yeah.
and it was more like I was stretching an injury versus really strengthening, like you said, the tendons and the structural,
Mm-hmm.
especially like when you're talking about your spine. Like I didn't realize like all the issues I've been having maybe in my hips and shoulders are spine related, and my posture being shit. So
100%.
a lot of that fixes it, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You don't even realize that you're holding on to this, like these dysfunctional type of patterns, right? You don't realize that you're kind of vulnerable because of what you're doing to your body every day. Um, I will say though that there are some training protocols that you can do when you're strength training that will, if you keep it between the 1 to 3 rep range, you typically, and you don't do too many sets, you won't typically fry your nervous system and you can continue to train. But also, um, when I go to the gym, I don't want to feel worse, right? I'm already kind of in pain coming off the mat. So when I go train, I don't want to like add to that. I want to feel better. So one of my favorite things to do as far as like a home workout or like a gym workout is to incorporate mobility training into my weight training. So there are like certain techniques that you can do, like the Cossack squat, for example. You guys familiar with the Cossack? Right? It's
Yes.
like it's almost like a lateral lunge, but it's also a squat at the same time. I mean, that is just to me one of the best movements that you can do for jiu-jitsu to begin with. I mean, it's hip mobility, it's ankle mobility, thoracic mobility, and then it's also single leg strength in a lateral movement. I mean, that is jiu-jitsu, right? And now, so I use that for a warm up all the time. And now you can weight that. So you hold the kettlebell, you hold some weights, and now you can make it a strength and mobility exercise in one, right? And I think the clubs are also, and the maces are also kind of in that same line where it's a workout and a mobility movement in one. So it's like you're feeling better, you're helping your body in these sessions, but you're also adding strength and durability while you're doing these too. So yeah, I'm now preaching those things 100%.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part about a lot of the club works, and one, the amount of like grip work you get from just holding onto that bad boy through all these ranges of motion, but two, like all the core firing you get, and like they're just like side, like resisting that momentum that you're created by swinging the club. It really does feel like somebody's trying to sweep you, and you like you're having to like fire your core over and over to resist the pull that you're creating by swinging the club around. And I think that is something that it's kind of lost in traditional weight training, where you're in this one plane going up and down, because we all have that experience training with like a big bodybuilder or a big power lifter, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like really strong in this one plane, but as soon as you get their spine off angle and their weight going forward a little bit, they don't come back.
Yep.
They kind of just tip over and like get swept. And then by integrating this kind of stuff, especially or like one-handed kettlebell stuff, where you're forcing your core, the opposite side of your core, to fire to like keep you in balance, it really feels like you're fighting against sweeping yourself. And like, if that makes sense, you're just you're teaching your body to get back to that center line that is so important in combat sports.
100%. I agree. I completely agree. So that's kind of the one knocks on traditional strength training, is that there isn't much rotational component to flat bench, deadlift, squat, right? You're definitely going to work the core, but jiu-jitsu is not just linear like that. Jiu-jitsu is rotations, right? So you're absolutely right. Where I think one of the most neglected factors in a lot of strength programs is the rotational component. And if you look at a lot of back injuries happen from a twisting and a bending, right? And that, I mean, that is jujitsu, right? Like, you know, how often, let's say like a knee cut, right? Well, your bottom half of your body is facing one direction and the top half of your body is facing the other direction. You know, a guard, your back is on the ground, but your legs are off to the side, right? So you face that rotational component every single time you're on the mat, but very few people are actually strengthening that position when they're off the mat. And just like you're saying, when you use like a one-arm kettlebell, right? There's a lot of stuff now with rotational kettlebell work. Wildman actually just came out with another program, his Wildman kettlebell program on effective strength and conditioning. That's a lot of this rotational stuff with the kettlebell. Same thing with the maces, same thing with the clubs. There's this rotational component that is strengthening your core and strengthening those little muscles around your spine that is going to, like I'm saying, it's not going to just help you reduce your chance of injury when you're on the mat, but it's actually going to help you perform a lot better too. So yes, I agree 1000%. Start adding rotational training, to your off the mat routine. And the other thing is like the kettlebell and the mace and the club. I'm kind of like a minimalist. You know, I don't, especially during the pandemic, right? Everyone was training at home. You didn't have access to a gym. A lot of times it's really not about all the different equipment. It's really about the programming and, being creative with what you have. So I don't want to spend a ton of time at the gym. I don't even want to go to a gym anymore. I was just talking about this the other day. Like I have no time. So if you need to go to a gym, you're taking time to get to the gym, then you got to warm up at the gym, you got to do your thing, then you got to drive home. So I'm really big on just minimal training at home, kettlebell, club, mace, because you can get pretty much everything you need there to be set for jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I agree 100% with these two little ones. One is a preschool now, but with this one, we sneak down to the basement. We take shifts and 45 minutes, get quick mobility, get your workout in, get a quick cool down, and back to chasing these things around. So 100%, I think having the kettlebells at home, having a club at home, and that's the other thing too. Is like you don't need much. It's like maybe one or two clubs or that 8X club that Wildman talks about all the time that can have the different weights.
Yep.
And a middle, I like heavyweight, whatever that means to you. You're a lady, an 8 kilo, you're a guy, 16, and medium weight, a heavyweight, and you can get a lot done with that. It doesn't take much. And the other thing too is realizing what is adding volume over time. I think is great for jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think jiu-jitsu guys a lot of times fall in the trap that if they're doing a strength and conditioning, they're just killing themselves and doing like this very high density work and trying to get as much work done in 5 minutes, or jumping on an echo bike or an assault bike and going as hard as possible for 2 minutes and doing that kind of stuff, or like very hard Tabatas. And the way I look at it, especially if you're a hobbyist, your sport is not a 5-minute sport. You should be working on how much work can I get done in your hour class or your 30 minutes of sparring. I look at it that way, and like how much work can I do over this 30-minute period of time, and not the smallest time, which is one round. Like you're not doing one round and then sitting out the rest of practice.
Right.
If you're in the most popular schedule known to mankind for jiu-jitsu rounds, it's going to be a 5-minute round, 1 minute break while you switch partners, and another 5-minute rounds for as long as you want to go.
Yep.
So I think taking that into consideration when you program your training, it will help a lot, and also doesn't beat you up as much as a really high intensity stuff.
No, I agree. Absolutely. It's kind of funny because just like you're saying, people think that you need to train high intensity for these 5-minute, 6-minute rounds, but really it's more of like a 60 to 90-minute endurance, event that you're going for. Even a tournament too. If you're good and you get through to the next couple of rounds. I remember in one of my I competed in the SJJIF World Championship, and my semifinal match, they have like a weird overtime in that. It's like they'll just keep going until somebody scores. It's like golden score with no time limit. They just keep going, right? And I was in like a 25-minute battle with this guy, and it was really because like I trained, like you're saying, I trained for like work capacity, the ability to do work over a long period of time. And it was just a war of attrition. It was like, who's going to break first, right? Who's going to get tired first? So I agree. I agree fully with you. And I also think that when you are training at home, you should not be, first of all, you should never get injured when you're weight training, right? Save your injuries for the mat, right? That's where they're going to happen. Don't get injured when you're at home. But you also don't want to beat yourself up more when you're at home, right? You want to feel good after your workout. You want to feel like, almost refreshed in a way. So that's the last thing I want to do is just add to how tired I am, how bad my joints hurt from a workout at home. So yeah, I would say, a lot of it is just about training smarter. So that's why I really recommend finding a good program, finding a good trainer. A lot of people want to do things on their own. I think there's a lot. I was a trainer for many years. There's a lot you can learn from someone who knows what they're doing, and experiment with new things. Now, there's one other thing that I will say. We're really touting the benefits of clubs and the benefits of this work capacity type training stuff, but you really need to train what you need, right? So if you are weak as hell, you need to do some strength training, right? Usually it's the smaller guys who can go forever. They have great endurance, right? And then they're really flexible, but they're not very strong. I would recommend those guys start training some strength training, and you can get good strength training with 2 kettlebells, right? Sometimes that's enough. You don't need to go barbell training. But if you're a big heavyweight, you're super strong, but you can't last very long, you have to train your endurance, your work capacity, your cardio. So yeah, it's kind of a spectrum there, but I agree 100% that we need to train with the kind of 60 to 90 minute time frame in mind, as opposed to like super high intensity, beat yourself up, go as hard as you can. I definitely agree.
I think I think the toughest part about programming for people is a lot of times they don't understand is one size does not fit all. Are you coming from were you a marathon runner before you came into jiu-jitsu, or were you a power lifter? Because your program's gonna be completely different if you came from one or the other. And then everybody's gonna be in the middle of that spectrum somewhere. But like you said, maybe you need that maximum strength, but then at the same time, it's like if you already have, let's say, a double body weight squat and deadlift, do you really need to get any stronger than that?
Exactly.
But but at the same time, if I put you in a rower or I get you to do like EMOM kettlebell swings and you're dying 2 minutes in, maybe we need to do something about that.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. I agree 100%. And, but it's also funny too, because at the end of the day, you're there to do jiu-jitsu, right? So I still maintain the idea that technique is the king, right? So, you need to work on these things that will definitely help support you on the mat, but the focus should always be to improve your technique. But, if you could combine you're strong as heck, right? You've got that 2 times bodyweight squat. You can go for, a 10K on a rower. Trying to do a 10K is absolutely brutal. And you have technique. I mean, you're going to be insane. And I think that's what we're seeing. A lot of guys, like at least at the professional level, are starting to put it all together and and reach that point.
Yeah, I mean, some of the biggest benefit I saw in my jiu-jitsu was probably about 4 years ago when our first kid was born. We set up a basement gym, and I always hated aerobic work. I always hated running. I did not enjoy it. I had like flashbacks or like football practice or rugby practice in college or running laps and doing all this stuff. And plus I carried all this ankle and knee injuries from jiu-jitsu. So anytime I put any kind of volume run in, I would end up with plantar fasciitis or like knee pain or shin splints, you name it. I would have like, my legs would get blown up. So I got a Concept 2 rower, and I got on a training program for like the rower, and we spent like about a year really into it, both my wife and I. And then eventually we got the skier too on the bike, so we weren't just stuck in the rowing pattern, but we were working, like the aerobic capacity, and then like doing a lot of like Maffetons number, like 180 minus your age, and just doing like all this heart rate work. And I got such a huge benefit from it because I had never done it. And like,
Sure.
I've been training, I've been doing sports since high school. I played rugby. I got into jiu-jitsu when I was in college. So I always been doing something, but I would be doing the strength and conditioning for jiu-jitsu. I'll be doing jiu-jitsu, but it was always either lifting weights or kettlebell circuits, EMOM stuff. So it was never this long, steady stuff. And at the beginning, it was absolutely brutal. Like you said, like, I would get gassed out, my legs would get blown out. And now that we got through it, and now we've been doing the work capacity stuff with the kettlebells, like, I train jiu-jitsu twice a week. In a good week, sometimes it's once a week. And I can go to roll with some very advanced guys and hang in there. Even like I've been helping the local 10 Planet guys get ready for Abu Dhabi trials on the East Coast. And we've been doing a hell of a ton of wrestling. And like, I'm hanging in there 20 minutes of wrestling rounds with like these very young and hungry brown belts and black belts getting ready for the Abu Dhabi trials. And I'm training jiu-jitsu once a week. If I wasn't doing all this stuff that I do at home, I'd be puking in a bucket, like, 5 minutes in.
Absolutely. 100%. I've always said this. I think there's a big focus, especially in the strength and conditioning community, to focus on strength, right? And I think there's a lot of benefit to strength training, like we talked about earlier in the episode. But I think endurance and the ability to keep fighting is like, I mean, that's what you're doing out there, right? You're fighting. So how often have you been completely exhausted on the mat and you have to just face that pain and keep going, right? Where you're going to puke, you can't breathe, you got a guy, his stomach is on your face and you can't, it's just like, it's grueling. You don't get that from strength training. You get that from doing, marathon pieces on an erg, or, doing hill sprints. So I 100% agree. I interviewed Kyle Sermonaro, who is a D1 All-American wrestler, and he was like, yeah, man, the ability to cardio. He thinks cardio is the factor that you really need to work. And his favorite tool was the bike, the
Assault
erg.
bike?
Yeah, the assault bike. That exactly. And that, if you've ever done like 2-minute pieces on an assault bike hard, and you do that for rounds, that is absolutely grueling. So yeah, I could totally see how some time spent with those Concept 2 machines would really help you a lot. I was on a crew team in college for a year. I did crew, and in the winter you can't go on the river, right? So you have to, for like 2 or 3 months, you're just inside on ergs every single day. And it's absolutely miserable, right? We were puking a couple times a week from the pieces that we were doing. But I actually ended up writing a piece for Jiu-Jitsu magazine in like 2017 on the benefits of the rower for jiu-jitsu fighters, because people have this misconception about the rowing machine. They think it's all arms, right? Like no, it's all legs and hip. And it's not only working your cardio, it's also working your strength endurance of your legs. It's like a little mini leg press every single time you do a stroke, right? So you're pushing with your legs, then you're extending with your back, and then you're finally pulling in with your upper back, and then your arms are like the last thing. It's a very small component to the actual stroke. So I think it's better than running because you don't have that constant pounding on your joints. And I also think it's good because it's working way more muscles than running, right? Running, I guess you do have some core stability, your upper shoulders and your arms and your legs, right? But when you sit on that erg, man, it's a total body workout. The one thing I don't like about it is that you're sitting. So, you get a lot of that when you're doing jiu-jitsu. So adding more sitting is not the greatest thing to do, but that's when you just have to really focus on kind of like, doing stretching and flexibility and mobility and all that type of stuff. But I agree, definitely try. I've never done the ski erg for time or anything like that. Do you guys play with that?
Yeah, so we have the ski erg in the basement, and when we got the program we were on, everything was based off your 2K time, your 2,000 meter row or ski erg or whatever. So we had to get we had to get a baseline 2,000 meter as fast as possible on the ski erg. And I never done this before. I did a few warm up, a little bit of warm up on it, like technique videos, making sure I was pulling and doing the whole thing. And the lung burn you get from the ski erg is just next level. I remember being collapsed in my basement for I rode it. I did the ski erg, whatever it was, like 9 minutes. I think eventually I got it down to about 7:15 for the 2K.
That's good.
But yeah, I just remember every time I had to test that thing, it was just I was in a puddle for about 20 minutes before I could get up again. So, again, I would not do that right before jiu-jitsu practice, but doing longer pieces on that, huge benefit. And especially the one thing that would always come back to me was guard passing scrambles. I could use, if you get good at the ski erg, you get into the guard passing scramble, you're like the passer and you're doing an X pass and then coming back, and that up and down motion, I could do that all day. And I would annoy a lot of my training partners because usually when you're in those scrambles, they don't last very long. So the guy in the bottom needs to hold on for so long before you reset and then he can attack. Mm-hmm. I was able to do that. I was able to double the time my passing scramble will last. What Hillary hated that machine, by the
way. Not many people like the concept too.
It's funny, because we first started with the rower, right? And I remember playing around with the rower a long time ago, and like you said, it was I was doing everything wrong, using my arms pretty much only. And then when we revisited how proper technique is supposed to go, and that's exactly what Nelson said, how it was a mini leg press, and it's just that constant motion that you want to come from your hips and your legs. I found it didn't have to hurt. Cardio didn't have to hurt either. Just strength training doesn't have to hurt. And I actually enjoyed the rower a lot once I got my technique right. But yeah, the ski erg, no matter what I did, I did it, and it would really help, I think, my shoulder, getting the mechanics of my shoulder to work properly with everything in my back and my posture. But I could not stop my heart rate from spiking. I don't think I ever did the test properly because my heart rate would just go through the roof before I could finish. Yeah. And even when I try to backtrack, it's just it messed. I couldn't get my breathing rhythm right for the longest time. I think finally I got there, but yeah, I struggled with that machine for probably at least a year.
Yeah, one of the things we've been doing now is if we do erg pieces, it's at least 2 ergs. So we're either on the rower and the biker or the echo bike, the Rogue assault bike. So we'll do something like 2 minutes in one, switch to the other one, do 2 minutes, and then whatever's rest. Do 5 minute pieces. So 2 in the whatever, the rower or the ski erg, and 2 on one of the bikes, and then rest, and then do another round that way. So you get a little bit of a break from when you change from the rower to the bike because you use different muscle groups and your arms get to take a break. Same with the ski erg. But you're able to get your heart rate pretty high throughout, and also it breaks down the monotony of just being in the same pattern for 30, 40 minutes.
Kind of what you mentioned about sitting for too long on the rower, how your butt kind of falls asleep.
Yeah.
Alternating between that and the bike, or getting up to stand with the ski and the bike, it helps. I think at least just that little bit of time walking between the machines too, to I don't know, twist around a little bit, stretch your legs, and then go for a short amount of time. Yeah, like you said, it breaks up the monotony, and
Yeah. So
workout goes faster.
let's change the subject since we've been nerding out in strength training for a while.
Yeah.
I think one of the guys I wanted you guys to discuss is you guys were at Atos very early on, both of you. And I had this experience also, but not to the level you guys had, where like, there was all these teenagers in the room that Hillary remembers as like, I think pre-blue belt, like, what did these guys like Rolando Sampson and
Michael Liera
and whatnot. Yeah. And then like, just watching these little teenagers become adults and they just become like world beaters.
Oh yeah. Oh, it was a special time at Atos. I remember Rolando, he used to terrorize me, man. He used to have this one technique where you'd have this little kid, man. He was just so scrappy, right? And he was all over you, and he'd be mounting you. He'd be on your back, and I outweigh him probably at that time by like 100 pounds. Like, I'm not even kidding. And he would take his gi out like it was some kind of like out of his belt, and he would take it out like it was like a knife, right? And he would hold it. And then he'd wrap it around your neck so fast that he'd choke you out with his gi. And I was like, man, this is insane. But yeah, it was a really interesting time seeing all those guys. Yeah, Hillary, when did you start training there? I started in 2010, or no, 2011 rather.
I believe it was like it was when they first moved there. I'm a little fuzzy on the years, but yeah, probably early 2011. I started transition over there from the University of Jiu-Jitsu, and I actually remember Liera from training there as well. Like when he came over as one of Fowler's old students before he moved to Hawaii. So like Liera was, I think, still like a green belt. Like he wasn't old enough to get his blue belt yet. But anyway, it was moving to Atos. It was just much more convenient. I love training with Angelica because I remember I was there shortly before she moved. But yeah, meeting her and getting a training partner in her, man, that was life changing.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I remember like Rolando like just pretty much hopping all over me like a little leapfrog. I thought I thought I was fast, but his speed, and then just Liera only got taller and taller.
Yeah.
But it was being there, I think, for like the training camps too. Like, do you remember any like the ADC, like the rooms for like the tournaments and ADCC?
Man, Andre doesn't like me telling this story, but I was there for his first, when he won in 2011, and it's really pretty amazing what he did, because it was a bunch of like ragtag nobodies in this room, right? It was just Andre with like you, maybe like a purple belt or two. I was a blue belt and a bunch of white belts. And he was just able to create this training room where, he doesn't like me saying this, but they were like, he would put garbage cans all around the mats because everyone was just throwing up. Like the training, he was able to simulate this training environment that was so intense. And he was able to go out and win double gold training against like blue belts and white belts. So yeah, it was a very cool experience.
So I came up going to Alliance in New York, and this was right after Marcelo left when I started training jiu-jitsu, when Marcelo had moved to Florida before he came back and opened up the academy in New York. So Lucas was there, and I remember just hearing the legends about Abu Dhabi training camps, and the same thing, like, this ragtag group of guys. My instructor, Kevin Sheridan, was like a high-level wrestler. He was wrestled D1 for Rutgers. So he was one of like Marcelo's main training partners, said in like, when he had Abu Dhabi coming up, and then Alliance would fly in like every camp. They would send somebody. I think Tarsis Humphreys would bring Tarsis up to like, so Marcelo had another high level black belt is there. But yeah, like, it's so impressive. A lot of these guys are Abu Dhabi champions, but like, they were running schools and teaching and just making do with whatever students they had, and just finding what these guys were better at and just putting themselves on those positions. So if you have one of these guys really good at wrestling, only doing wrestling rounds with that guy.
Yeah.
Because if we're doing rounds and I start with mount on you, that wrestler is not gonna really give you much. But then finding the guy that has really good mount, and then you just put him to starting every round with that guy from mount, or somebody has a really good back choke, starting with back. with that guy, and like using that approach to get ready for tournaments, I always thought was super interesting. One thing I wanted to talk about was you and Wildman did this series on YouTube about rule sets, and I found it really fascinating. Can we talk about that real quick? We talked about it a little bit with the Sports Jiu-Jitsu Federation and their golden score rule, which I can decide if I like it or not. because like you said, like sometimes it lends itself for like a 20-minute battle, and then the logistics of the tournament just go out the window because there's two white belts fighting over supremacy.
That's how Grappler's Quest used to run. Remember that?
Yeah.
I remember just standing there with two heavyweights just having a shoving match, trying to keep them in bounds. Like nobody. Yeah.
I think AJP Tour uses golden score as well, but they only have 2 overtime periods. And then if nobody scores in those overtime periods, then they go to the person who scored the last point in the regulation period.
Interesting.
Okay.
So it's kind of rewarding somebody who, fought to the end. They fought to the end of the match, and then whoever scored last after the golden score overtime periods, that person, if there's no score, that person wins.
So there's one rule set that I like. There's combat wrestling. It's like the Japanese guys set it up, and it's like very similar to sambo rules in the way you score. So like your throws you get amplitude points for the throws.
Oh, cool.
So they can be like a 1-point throw, a 2-point throw, or a 4-point throw. And then if I make a big enough throw and I stand on my feet, that would have been a 4-point throw, and I stay on my feet. That's like total victory, same as in sambo. And that it ends the match, right? So the way it is, if it's tied at the end, whoever had the biggest score wins. So if I score a 4-point throw and then you score 2-point throws, the guy with the big throw is going to win.
Interesting.
And then if we both had the same amplitude score, like we both scored 2 4-point throws, whoever scored first wins. So there's I think like there's like criteria. And then I believe high school wrestling is the same thing too, where there's overtime periods, and then if there's overtime periods, and then what was the thing? You end up in a situation where there's criteria also.
You also do you have 5-point throws in high school wrestling?
No.
Right?
High school wrestling is folk style, so just 2 points for the takedown. And I believe there's criteria too. Like now I'm blanking out on it. Yeah, I think there's criteria because I think there's like who scored first, who scored who scored back points, stuff like that. It goes down the list, and then like the last criteria for high school wrestling is who weighed in lighter.
Who weighed in lighter?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that was a thing.
That was a thing that I remember this from back in the day. Yeah, it's like who. So it goes down to like all these things, and if everything's dead set, is who, like one guy was 101 pounds, and the other guy was 103 pounds. The lighter guy is going to win because
just to eliminate any possibility of a tie. Wow.
Yeah, and I think I like criteria. I think I would rather have criteria over refs decisions in jiu-jitsu if we can eventually get that figured out, because every time there's a ref's decision, it just leads to arguments online or shouted matches at the venue.
100%.
Especially during big matches.
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I'm not an expert in rules by any means, right? I'm just kind of like some things that I've noticed. And I think ref decisions are like the worst, right? Like no one wants to see no one feels good after, especially in a final, if you win on a ref's decision, right? It's like, man, did you actually, So I think the answer to the whole problem is just everyone needs to have better jiu-jitsu. Like Gordon Ryan, for example, he goes out there. It doesn't matter what rule set he's in. He submits the other guy, right? He always finishes the guy. So it doesn't matter like what rule set he's in. And I think that should be kind of the goal of a lot of competitors, instead of like trying to figure out what rule set is best. And because it doesn't matter what rule set, everyone is going to try to game the rules, right? I think the goal of everybody should be to get their jiu-jitsu to a point where they can just out technique anybody and finish the fight, right? Finish. But that's kind of my pie in the sky vision for jiu-jitsu. The one thing I will say about Gordon Ryan is that when he competes, it takes him a long time to usually warm up. He doesn't come out of the gate and just submit you in the first, couple of minutes. It usually takes him a while. That's why a lot of his matches are like 20, 30-minute like marathons, right? So if you I personally like watching shorter matches. I think that kind of like leads to a little bit more intensity. I think AJP Tour's 5-minute matches. Yeah. I think that's almost too short, because a lot of times what happens is a guy will wait till about 3 minutes, get his sweep, and then hold on for the last, until the time runs out, right? There's really almost no time for the guy who is down on points to fight back and work. I think like a 7-minute match at the pro level, 7 to 8 minute match might be a good time period. But you know what I also think too is that like when you sign up to compete in an event and you agree to the rule set, you can't complain, right? Like there's a lot of like complaining out there about refs' decisions and this and that. It was like, well, that was in the rules, right? You knew that refs' decisions were a possibility, so you really can't complain. But that's just kind of my take there.
Will for president.
So I agree with you. At the end of the day, it comes down to competitors, and like you're absolutely right. Like everybody, no matter what the rules set, no matter what the grappling sport is, their rules are going to be gamed.
Yeah.
And I feel the IBJJF has done a much better job recently about updating the rules and trying to like close some of these loopholes that people were abusing. Mm-hmm. That for a long time kind of like stood there. Like the rules really didn't change for like something like 10 years. There really weren't like any major updates. Yeah. But we recently took the referee course, and they're starting to change things. I think the most previous one was that the 50-50 metagame, where people were just gaming the advantage game and you sweeping back and forth and wrecking advantages.
Yep.
And that was not entertaining to watch at all. No. And now the other thing too was when people were like sweeping from the bottom and just coming up in singles and then getting thrown back down, and like no, there was no score because they initiated the sweep from the bottom. So now there's like a 3-second window where if they don't get the takedown in 3 seconds and they're standing on their feet, the fight has reset, and now they're both standing. So that's awesome. Throwing back down, you actually score now. I think that was a huge issue with the rules for a long time. It was kind of getting abused. I feel like Bernardo was one of the bigger abuses when he was playing, because that was whole of Bernardo's game, which is he would get smashed in the bottom, come up with a single, and you just fight to the death to finish that single. And a lot of times he would get thrown back down and nothing would happen. It was just Bernardo back in half guard with like the super deep lapel grip, and then like he would belly down again, come up and score, and then start that maniacal smash over underpass that he had.
Yes, sir. Yep.
And now now that kind of closes that game plan is not as effective anymore, because now if I get thrown back down, it can change. I feel like wrestling over the years has done if you follow wrestling as international wrestling, especially the year that they got like kicked out of the Olympics, and like they're just like, all right, like we need to fix this, and they completely revamped the rules to make it more entertaining to watch.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that it kind of gets missed. It's like, I understand we're martial art, I understand jiu-jitsu is also a sport, it's self-defense and all these things. But if we want jiu-jitsu to become a spectator sport, at some point we need to worry. It's like, hey, like, is this thing that we're doing entertaining to watch?
Yeah.
And I feel that IBJJF, some of the changes, same like the double guard pull and getting people to stand up is good. I feel one of the things I feel like we need is there's a lot of stalling and standing up, and guys just playing the edge, and just waiting for people to shoot, and just throw a guillotine on to maybe try to get an advantage.
Yep.
And was the guy Pedro Marinho? Yep. He's won Nogi Worlds in the Absolute, and man, like he had like a beautiful jiu-jitsu, but whenever he fought like bigger guys, it's like, I'm gonna wait for you to shoot on me because I'm not getting penalized
Yeah,
for not shooting. So I
exactly.
thought like that was, I think that's why wrestling eventually had to get a shot clock, because
Yeah.
everybody got so good at that front headlock that nobody wanted to shoot, and it was a battle to get into the front headlock. So I
Yes.
think jiu-jitsu guys are figuring this out now.
Yeah, I agree 100% with the shot clock. I think there should be shot clocks on a lot of things, or at least clocks on a lot of things, right? So, like the 50-50 position, I think there should be a clock on, right? I think so. When you do the double guard pull, there's 20 seconds, right? You have 20
Yeah.
seconds to work, and then you have to stand up. Yes, if you watch the final with Cyborg, it was pretty boring, right? There was just a lot of pushing around for a long time, and then Cyborg finally decided to shoot a few times, and then you're right. Pedro was right on the guillotine every time, and I think that was probably why he ended up winning that final, if I have that remembered correctly. I don't know. I watched
Yeah.
a lot of
No.
jiu-jitsu that day, but the problem that I see arising. One other thing I think there should be a clock on is a 50-50 lapel grip. So when you have the 50-50 with the lapel, that is some of the most boring jiu-jitsu you will watch, and I think it's like really kind of pulling down the sport a little bit with that position in particular. I think with that grip in particular, you should have to use it, do something with it within like 10, 20 seconds, or else you have to let it go. Right. And you could maybe extend that to some of the other lapel grips that these guys just get tied up and you're sitting there and there's no jujitsu happening. Right.
Yeah, there's the one that was somewhat popular. I remember Marcio Andre would do it, and he would like grab the opponent's lapel and like wrap it around his shin, like once or twice, and then it's like, where are you gonna go now? Like, my foot is just stuck to your hip. I'm pulling on this lapel. My other foot is still free, and like controlling distance is like, yeah. If some of the lapel stuff can get really, 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 if the guy in the bottom doesn't want anything to happen, nothing's gonna happen.
Yeah, and that this is like so disappointing to someone who loves the gi, right? Like I love gi jujitsu. I love watching gi jujitsu. It's way more interesting to me. But the problem is that it's not all that spectator friendly, especially if you don't train, right? Like no gi jujitsu, you can put somebody who doesn't train, and they kind of get like the scrambles and the wrestling and the high pace aspect to that. But that's why I think something kind of really needs to be done for gi jujitsu to make it to put a little bit more urgency on the competitors, right? Um, so I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah. Here's another idea though. So if you start adding more rules, this is the problem that I see, and this is the thing that I saw at the recent IBJJF Noki World Championship, was that there were a lot of messed up calls by the refs. So if you start piling on more rules and more rules, and now you have clocks you have to watch, and all of these different things that the ref really needs to pay attention for, then you have this opportunity for kind of like blown calls, and then you've got competitors who are upset, or you've got competitors who are trying to game these rule sets, and then the ref isn't giving them the call because they were trying to hold just as long, just long enough to not get a call, and then the ref blows it out. It's just like, it seems like when we start adding more rules, we might start complicating things, and we kind of need to figure out a way to simplify things, but also make them more exciting at the same time, which may not ever be possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be a balancing act.
Yeah.
You guys run, there was a tournament in San Diego, the BJJ Fanatics New Way, right?
Yeah.
Jiu-Jitsu. And then you guys were, I think you won the Poconos not too long ago, maybe a year ago. So I know a lot of my local friends went up to the tournament and really enjoyed the rule set. Are you happy with that rule set? Is there any changes you guys thinking about making?
Yeah, we were a little disappointed with that event. There were a lot of submissions, and a lot of guys came to fight, like Pierre Leclerc and Nick Ronan. Those guys came to scrap, man, and that's where that's what my point in the beginning about this whole rule conversation, and that it needs to be on the athlete, right? They can't come and think they're going to game the system. They need to go out there. It needs to start with the athlete wants to go out there and finish the other guy. That is their goal, right? So if
that's the main point of jiu-jitsu, right? Find the submission, end it.
Exactly, 100%. So if that, if what we have to do is incentivize that more, maybe you get $1 million if you submit somebody. You think guys would be going for the submission, right? So we got to find that perfect balancing act where I think who's number one world championship did it pretty well, where they had was it like $1,000 or something for every submission?
$1,000.
There were so many submissions, right? That they were giving out checks left and right, which was awesome. But getting back to BJJ Fanatics, so some of the guys were just going to decision, right? And that wasn't great. And then we also had this issue where we had a lot of, so with that particular tournament, we had a lot of guys drop out just due to some guys got COVID, some guys got hurt. There were just some travel issues, with getting into the United States. So there was just a whole mix of kind of issues where guys were pulling out. So we ended up having a few guys from the same team competing. And that always gets sketchy too, because you're like, oh man, are they actually fighting? Are they putting on, is this kind of not, a real fight, or they're not actually going for it? So you run into that issue as well. And I was just thinking about this as you have these schools that are attracting all this talent, right? You've got Atos, you've got DDS, now you've got the B team, you've got Alliance, you've got a lot. They're kind of all of the high level competitors are being drawn to those specific schools, right? Now you got Pedigo is really attracting some high level names, but there's only a handful. If you look at the guys who are competing regularly on these pro events, they're all kind of from the same batch of schools. So how do you fix this issue of, friends fighting against each other? I like what ADCC does, and they just first or second round, you guys got it. There's no way you can fight deep into the bracket and then someone, has a fake fight to get into the finals, or a fake fight to get semifinals, a fake fight to win, $40,000. So that was just a few of the takeaways that we got from that event.
Awesome.
Do you guys have a favorite rule set or a favorite event that you like to you think is kind of balances all out with being exciting, being fair to the competitors?
So I like the, what you call it, AJ Pro,
AJP.
AJP, or used to be Abu Dhabi Pro.
Yep.
The Abu Dhabi Pro circuit. I think I like the rules, and I like that, like you said, a shorter time period. When I competed at black belt, I had going back to my lack of endurance, I did not like the 10-minute matches. And not only the length, but I'm super ADHD, and I had a hard time just staying hyper focused on everything that's going on in jiu-jitsu match for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, I'm really looking forward. We opened an academy now, and now we're back in the good graces of the IBJJF. So I think we're gonna do some tournaments, and I am looking forward to competing in the Masters bracket at 6-minute match. Mm-hmm. I think that's plenty. I think that'll be good. I always like the Abu Dhabi rules. I think penalizing the guard pool leads to more exciting matches. And then for a long time, one of the knocks on it is that just leads to shitty wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
It's the thing though is now that a lot of everybody's working on wrestling. If you don't work on your wrestling, guess what? You're gonna take it down a lot.
Yeah.
So if the rule, if the rule is there, and people realize there's an advantage to actually working on your takedowns, the high level guys would eventually, you will eventually force people to get good takedowns. So I think if the IBJJF penalize the guard pool, even if it's an advantage for the opponent, because I always find it silly that in order to get an advantage for that, I need to time a double guard pull and come up, so I get the advantage instead of, okay, the other guy pull guard, just give the other guy an advantage, and we can remove this whole teeter out of the match.
Yeah. What about if instead of penalizing the guard pull, because I like pulling guard, so And jujitsu is the guard, right? Like that's
Yeah.
what makes jujitsu. So instead of penalizing the guard pull, you incentivize the takedown by doing some of that sambo stuff, where if you get both feet off the ground, then it's actually a 3-point throw, right? So like you incentivize people to go for the takedown by rewarding them with more than just 2 points, right? Could be
Yeah.
an idea for you.
Well, the thing too is like, especially if I'm able to get more points for my takedown, people are going to pull guard even quicker.
True.
Because you only put yourself in a deeper hole. You try to stand up. But yeah, like you said, the problem is we can dream about all these rule sets all we want. Once they're implemented, somebody's going to find the loophole and exploit it fairly quickly.
Yeah, the one thing that I think is great that's happening right now is that we have all these events and people are trying new things, right? There's
Yeah.
people are trying new rule sets. AJP, I agree, is one of the most exciting. They know it's a 10-second clock. It's no longer 20 seconds. You have 10 seconds to work if you're put on a clock like that. And 6-minute matches, no advantage. So it's actually a full point. If like an advantage is worth a point instead of like an advantage. So if you do like a near submission and the guy has to defend, that's a point. So they're trying to make it more exciting. There's a lot of organizations out there that are trying to kind of solve this problem. So I'm totally open to that.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too is as these rule sets change, it kind of changes the way people train. So EVI is a perfect example. When EVI was like the no-gi event, besides Abu Dhabi, because Abu Dhabi is only every 2 years, and people were training for this EVI and the EVI purses, everybody's back control and backscapes exponentially better than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because especially these no-gi gyms that are sending guys to the EVI or the combat jiu-jitsu. Like me and Hillary visit the 10th Planet Bethlehem in Allentown fairly often. And I've been training for 14 years, and I take the back of some of these blue belts and purple belts, and I cannot submit them, and they escape my back control, Wow. Also, I trained 14 years, but 10 of those years was with like 90% gi, so I can't cheat and just grab 2 lapels anymore.
Yeah.
So I the last 5 years I've just been doing a lot of after I became a black belt, we started training a lot more no-gi and learning the leg game. And 2, just getting better at passing and submitting without the gi, because suddenly if you don't have lapel grips, changes the game completely. I can beat these guys positionally, but a lot of these guys are training for EVI or this no time limit events, or submission only events, better way to put it, are so hard to submit.
Yes.
And they're just throwing submissions from everywhere. All these people getting so good at boogie choke now.
Yes.
Or guys I train with John Blank Thor fairly often. That dude submits me from everywhere. And a lot of times I don't want to pass his guard because he has all these shenanigans that he does once I'm in side control, or he lets me get to north south so he can invert and either get to my back, get to my arm, or get to my leg.
Yeah.
So I joke around rolling with Thor is stepping into a wood chipper. Whatever goes in there, it's not going to end up well.
That's a good point, man. He is nasty. He has a lot of unique submissions. He's got a crazy straight arm bar where he locks your you have an underhook and he locks your arm there. He's got he plays rubber guard too, right? He's got a rubber guard game, and then he's just awesome at heel hooks. I took a picture of him at ADCC in 2019 where he is submitting Rustam with a heel hook, and Rustam is screaming
and that is not a regular human either.
Yeah,
Rustam is one of the toughest human beings on the planet.
No, John Blank is nasty, and I hate that. I hate when you say you work so hard to pass the guard, and then you're in side control, and you're like, you feel accomplished, and then someone puts you in a buggy choke, or there's a darce. You can get a darce from side. It's like, damn it! It's the worst feeling. So.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time. This was great. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, no, this was awesome. Thank you guys so much for having me. You can find me at Will Safford BJJ on Instagram, And I'm all over the place. So check us out at Hyperfly, BJJ Fanatics, Effective Strength and Conditioning. Yeah, that's it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you for listening, Panda Nation. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Inverted Gear podcast. You can find us at invertedgear.com as well as your favorite podcast app. Don't forget to give us a like, and we'll see you soon.